Good afternoon and good morning on the West Coast, which is where one of our speakers is. Here we are. It's really great to see everyone and great to be here with these sort of three panelists. Let me say a word or two about what we're doing here. This is called NYC 2025 Continuing Conversations. And in order to understand why we're having these continuing conversations, it's important for you to know a little bit about NYC 2025. So what we did with this particular project is we convened some nonpartisan experts across a range of areas. And the reason that we did this is we wanted to be able to contribute. I might argue, and Linda will correct me if I'm wrong, NYU feels like an anchor institution and wanted to actually contribute to the city life, us being NYU in the city and for the city in lots of ways. So we wanted to figure out how to have the city become a stronger, more equitable city than it was before COVID-19. And so what we did was commission a series of policy proposals. We were up to 30 different policy proposals that explore issues centered around several different priority areas, thinking about the flexibility with which New York City responds to change, trying to figure out how we prioritize inclusivity and equality in the city's economic growth, and then restoring and boosting how the city actually can improve the quality of life, and finding the most efficient uses possible for the city budget. And so I am so pleased to actually be joined here today by three of our incredible authors who are sort of fantastic. The first author that I'm going to introduce is actually Richard Briffault. And Richard, actually you probably may remember this, but you and I go way, way back to my first time at the New York City Department of Finance in 1990, when we set up an advisory tax reform commission, which sounds quite familiar these days. Commissions seem to be the way people go, and you served on that commission. It was greatly appreciated. What I should say about Richard Berfault is he is the Joseph Chamberlain Professor of Legislation at Columbia Law School. He does a lot of sort of research and writing with a focus on state and local government law, legislation, the law of the political process, government ethics, and property. And what I remember about you, Richard, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, is that you also did a lot of work on the Charter Reform Commission, as I recall, back in the late 1980s, that led to our current structure really for the city council and the borough presidents and also the speaker. And I just remember the first session that I attended describing that you were just so clear and thorough, and I really completely enjoyed it. And so Richard's paper actually is a really, I would call it an overarching paper that really talks about what's the power of the mayor and the city. So it kind of undergirds, or maybe I should sort of say, describes for all of these policy proposals, what can a mayor really do, right? So he sort of sets the framework for that, and he's going to start our conversation. But let me introduce the other two sort of panelists as well. So Andrew-Eristoff is kind of in many ways sort of my hero, sort of my wannabe person. And I got the privilege of actually following Andrew. He was my predecessor as the finance commissioner in New York City. So I came in right after Andrew served in that role. But then he went on to do something that, I could only aspire to do. Not only did he lead the city finance department, he went on to lead the state of New York's finance department, and then also went to the New Jersey's finance department. So he actually, is kind of our tri-state finance commissioner or secretary sort of person extraordinaire. Not only that, one of the other things that I sort of, envy about Andrew a little bit is I have never been able to serve in the legislature. And he did. He served as a city council member. So he kind of brings that perspective to bear. And his paper is entitled, sort of Do No Harm, and talks really broadly about tax policy and what the mayor and the city council should be thinking about as we kind of emerge from the COVID. Emerge from the pandemic. I'm not hoping that that's going to actually happen, but as it happens, that'll be great. And then finally, I am joined by Linda Gibbs, who I'm just, kind of always crazy about, and personally has also known Linda going way back to sort of 1990, and have loved watching her career kind of blossom. When we first met, she worked at the city council. She then sort of went over and did some stuff at OMB, and then ended up, I can't say ended up because here she is still around. She was a deputy mayor for Health and Human Services for New York City in Mayor Bloomberg's administration. And I had the privilege of working with her when I was the finance commissioner on projects that she really wanted to make sure happened. She now works at Bloomberg Associates, right? Not the philanthropy side, on the associate side. She also was the commissioner of the New York City Department of Homeless Services. She held senior positions, New York City Administration for Children's Services, and she serves on the NYC 2025 Advisory Board. And I must say, she and Ruth Messenger have been our most active readers of every single paper that was submitted, and that was greatly appreciated. Her paper is actually on the potential of anchor institutions. So she serves that dual role as being on the advisory board and then also volunteered to write a paper. So thank you so much for that, Linda. Let me tell you how we're going to kind of—
I just have to say, take a point of privilege to say, I also served on the New York City Charter Revision Commission, and when I was younger and Richard was younger, so many years
and
ago.
you both had darker colored hair, as I recall.
Richard more than me.
Yes, absolutely. You also served, kind of almost ran the Property Tax Reform Commission, the Grayson one that was done in 1993. So, just goes back so far. The older we get, the more we know each other. It's actually, and Linda's a sailor, which is also kind of fun. So absolutely cool. So what I thought we'd do today actually is I wanted to give each of the panelists, it says here 5 minutes, but really you can have 7 to 8 minutes, as long as Lori, who has so been ably backing us up here, doesn't mind. And I thought what I'd ask you to do actually is kind of tell us sort of a little bit about your paper and your sort of overall kind of conclusions and suggestions and recommendations that have emerged from sort of your research and the like. And so we'll do that for about, I'd say 15 to 20 minutes or so. And then what I thought I'd do is ask you a few questions. Again, I've read your papers a few times, and so just have a few kind of general questions, and then we'll leave enough time for the audience, about 15 minutes for any questions that they might have. And as I said, what I thought we'd do is, in keeping with the subject matter, is we'd start with Richard and then go to Andrew, who will further kind of flesh out one of the topics that Richard will argue the city has some control over and things that they can do. And then what we'll do is go to Linda, who can talk about the anchor institutions that can really be supportive partners of a government, a mayor, and leadership who might want to incorporate change, but there's some things they need to do to make that happen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Richard, and thank you again for being here, all three of you.
Thank you, Martha, and it's great to be here, maybe as the representative of the Uptown Anchor Institution, although I guess there are probably other, I shouldn't say as yet another important Uptown Anchor institutions, and I'm glad that Linda spoke up, because yes, so when you mentioned the Charter Commission the first time, and I noticed Linda was smiling, we do go back to about 1988 or 1989 with that, so it's kind of scary to think about it. I think I could actually summarize my paper in about 3 sentences, but I might embellish beyond that. Sentence 1 is, within the city government, the mayor is incredibly powerful. I was almost going to say all powerful. That's probably a little too strong, but within the framework of the city government, this can be an extended sentence, maybe it's a paragraph. And the frame of the city government, mayor is incredibly powerful. much more powerful than the president is within the United States government, and probably even more powerful than the governor is within the New York State government. And New York State governor is pretty powerful. So just with things, looking at the mayor's appointments process, we still see 18 months practically into the Biden's term, he's still struggling to make appointments, leaving aside the Supreme Court. Mayor has huge appointments power. Mayor sets the tone on the budget. Everyone works off the mayor's budget. The mayor sort of sets policy and the tone of the regime all the way down in a way that it's within the areas that the state gives the city. But that's getting into my second sentence. Within the areas that are the cities, the mayor is incredibly powerful, and I definitely more powerful than the president, and I think even more powerful than the governor. That's sort of extended sentence one. Sentence two is, but looming over all of this is the state. Because the state, with respect to New York City, is even more powerful than the mayor. Certain areas that we think of as part of city government are really belong to the, or either are or should be maybe part of city government, really a part of the domain of the state. Education is a state function. Transportation is controlled by, at least MTA is controlled by state agencies. Criminal justice law and policy is largely set by the state. So a number of the areas that we think of as central to what a mayor, but people looking to their local government to do, or looking to their daily lives, schools, subway, policing, the state has an enormous role. But then third, in practice, there is a lot of play in the joints, and either because things have been delegated to the city, or because the actual administrative aspects of this, the enforcement aspects, the regulatory discretion that operates at the operational level, the city can actually do a fair amount, even in some of the areas which are ultimately controlled by the state, or at least there's a certain amount of back and forth. Some of that back and forth is political, and maybe the most important thing the mayor can do, and I know we want to talk about the current mayor, but maybe probably the most important thing he has done so far, I think, is have a good relationship with the governor. Now, he may be lucky in terms of who his governor is, in a way that his predecessor was not, and in particular, the political situation his governor is in a way that his predecessor was not. But maybe the most important thing he has to have is a good relationship, a good working relationship with the governor, which as a newspaper reader, and that's all I am, he appears to have. Beyond that, I mean, I think that there are areas like land use and zoning policy is one where this city has traditionally been given a huge amount of discretion. But for other things, any big changes in education, we know that the mayor is struggling to get mayoral control renewed, didn't come automatically. I know there are issues that the mayor has with changes the state's made in the criminal laws that arguably affecting police practices. We know that that's an issue. And even we'll get to tax. I know there were a couple of references to real property tax. Whatever is the city can do there, if we're talking about other kinds of taxes like income and sales, we're talking about the state. So maybe just to, as I said, I'm going to be brief. Within the structure of the city government, mayor has a huge amount of power. And beyond that, maybe I should even emphasize the mayor's tone setting power, the power to set the agenda, the power to influence public discussion. And again, that's one where the current mayor seems to really know what he's doing in a way that not all of his predecessors have, at least in the first 2.5 months. He seems to understand the bully pulpit function of a mayor. The state is the overarching big boss in this. But then third, much turns then on how the mayor is able to use the state or get what he wants in the state, keep the state off his back when he doesn't want the state on his back. And that's what we're going to find out over the coming months and years of this new administration. So I could talk about more specific things, but I think that's really, for our purposes, that's really the main things I wanted to say.
That's perfect. Thank you, Richard, for setting that up. So yeah, so the bully pulpit, tone setting, swagger, all of that.
I was avoiding swagger. I'll stick with tone setting, but yes, okay. Swagger is definitely there.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Andrew, why don't we turn it over to you?
Thank you so much. I really appreciated your remarks, Richard. And I'm anxious to follow up with some questions. But before I get into the substance, I just want to claim charter membership of the Martha Stark fan club. We've been colleagues in and around government for many, many years, and I consider you really the gold standard when it comes to public service and public policy analysis and really the civic values that I think all of us hold dear. And Linda, it was such a pleasure to work with you in city government when I was a junior member of the city council, and you were a very wise source of knowledge, information, insight, and guidance as a senior staff member of the council at that time, before you were elevated appropriately into senior positions on the executive side. So it's wonderful to be back with you both. So my paper addresses the broad question of how New York City's tax system, its tax policy and its administration of those policies can favorably impact its economic competitiveness. And the underlying presumption is that economic competitiveness matters for two reasons in this context. First, whether we like it or not, New York is and always will be in a simmering long-term global competition for investment and jobs. I don't happen to believe in New York City economic exceptionalism. We are subject to the same kinds of competitive forces that other major jurisdictions and cities around the world are. Second, the city can't generate the revenue necessary to fund a sustainable and inclusive recovery and the restoration of vital city services without a strong economy. The federal government's recent largesse will, in fact, at some point taper off, and the city needs to be prepared for that and to plan for the long term. So I know I sound like a conventional tax cut conservative, or at least I'm winding up that way, but I would ask that you suspend judgment as I detail three threshold points that I think are really important. First, let's be realistic about what New York City tax policy and administration does and how, or to the extent to which it can actually impact competitiveness. Even though New York City raises more in taxes than many state governments, and local tax burdens are generally higher than regional and national counterparts, the fact remains that New York City taxes by themselves are only one of many, many, many components of competitiveness, alongside others such as the quality of local infrastructure, municipal services, education, etc. So city taxes matter, but they certainly are not the whole show when it comes to competitiveness. Second, yes, city taxes matter, but perhaps not in the way many of us think they do. Based upon my years in city and state government, I believe that local taxes play an important role over time at the margins of economic decision-making. Given the limited role of local taxes within the larger economic context, local tax policy, in my opinion, is best thought of as a defensive as opposed to an offensive policy instrument. Instead of daydreaming over how cutting local taxes or creating new tax incentives will generate jobs and additional investment, I think we need to focus on the reality that local taxes can largely negatively impact incremental decisions to invest in New York City's economy over time. Stated in a different way, local tax policy can do lots more harm than good. It follows then that our priority with respect to New York City tax policy ought to be to avoid and mitigate harm in the first instance, hence the title of my paper, First, Do No Harm. And third, I think we would all agree that COVID changes everything. Our conventional notions of tax competitiveness are based on a pre-COVID understanding of how we live and work. As the New York City Partnership and others have documented, businesses and their workers have been slow to return to Manhattan-based offices. COVID has demonstrated that remote or at least hybrid work models are feasible and may well become the norm for some of the major industries that contribute a disproportionate amount to the city's revenues, such as finance. Whether COVID simply accelerated larger trends toward a distributed and mobile or global economy or not, it's plain that the competitive landscape has changed. And I believe there will be, that landscape will be more sensitive to bad local, state, and federal tax policy. If you accept the premise that local taxes are most impactful at the margin, and that our priority should be to avoid or mitigate harm, then we need to focus our attention on those taxes, local taxes, that are negative outliers with respect to our competition in this region and beyond. So my paper identifies several taxes that, in my subjective opinion, qualify as negative outliers because they are unique or they are imposed at rates that are substantially higher than elsewhere. These would include the commercial rent tax, the corporate income tax, the unincorporated business tax, the personal income tax, the real property transfer tax, the sales and use tax, and the utility tax. Note that I did not and was not asked to take on the massive topic of property taxes, which I will leave to our esteemed chair for later discussion. But the message is simple. I think city policymakers should be very careful when considering whether to raise those taxes if and when that is deemed necessary. Conversely, my paper also identifies a handful of taxes that are arguably not negative outliers. And thus, they may be amenable to adjustment without hurting New York City's competitive position. These would include the hotel occupancy tax and the mortgage recording tax. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating tax increases. And I know that increasing the hotel occupancy tax, for instance, would quickly be characterized as contrary to the city's growing reliance and emphasis on tourism and hospitality. Nevertheless, the fact is that our hotel occupancy tax is relatively low, in the larger context. So I'm just putting it on the list for illustrative purposes, that there are some options that are arguably less harmful in the event that the city seeks additional revenue. And then finally, at the end of my paper, I offer a compilation of various ideas for legal and administrative changes that would help to streamline city tax administration and reduce the burden on taxpayers. Of course, many, if not all of those changes require collaboration with the state, which I'm sure we'll get back to, but none of that, that competition historically can't be taken as a given. So let me stop there. I will look forward to the discussion and questions.
Great, Andrew, thank you. This is the second time you're presenting your paper, having done it also at the Association for a Better New York, which greatly appreciated as well. Let me turn it over to Linda.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here, pleased to be with you, Martha and Andrew and Richard. So nice to be connected to you again. So this concept, in the course of reviewing the New York City 2025 papers that were coming in as a member of the advisory board, we were really looking for strategies that could help in, of course, a new mayor, to help a new mayor to assume responsibilities of this gargantuan job. But to do so in a really, really unique circumstance of the city just reeling from COVID, from the pandemic, from the social impact of that isolation, from the disproportionate impact on communities and populations who have suffered from chronic disparities across socioeconomic conditions, but then just seeing that exacerbated by COVID, and the economic fallout of all of that simultaneously. So the mayor is coming into just a job of extraordinary, with all that power comes an awful lot of responsibility. It's a big job, and doing it in good times is hard, but needing to do it in really, really challenging times. So as we were reading the papers, we were really looking at where are those kind of exciting and inspiring thoughts about how the job can be approached in a way that can move the city forward and address the disparities across communities and populations. And so at the same time, as we were having these conversations, I was involved in supporting Mayor Sadiq Khan in London, where he is working with partner organizations in London to collaborate around a more equitable recovery. And out of that collaboration, we started to form a concept of the organizations not simply coming to the table as kind of thought partners and responding to the mayor's call, will you come and help me think about what good recovery looks like, but really starting to think about how do we make that translate down to the neighborhood level. And so there, what we have been working on is developing an anchor network. And so I was reading the papers and for New York City and thinking about my work in London, I was sort of inspired to jump into the game and submit a paper myself, because I'm really convinced that there is a huge amount of untapped potential in our anchor institutions in New York City to contribute to a more equitable recovery. So what is an anchor institution? This is not a new concept. It actually started a lot in kind of the medical world and in the university world, sometimes in response to having not been a good neighbor, where you have a large organization that is present in a community. And we know, two of our favorite anchor institutions are on the phone here today, NYU and Columbia University. And oftentimes relationships with the community have just not been great. Gobbling up real estate, tearing down affordable housing to build a great new research center, competing social purposes. But the tensions at those community lines can be just really terrific. And the work began in and actually the University of Pennsylvania is a leading US example of this, of just saying, okay, aren't there ways that we can achieve our university purposes and be a good neighbor and bring benefit to the community around us? And so, and this has popped up in different places in different ways, but the basic concept is an anchor institution is a organization that is kind of tethered to the community. It's not someone who can come and go and, sort of pick up and do just as well elsewhere. New York University is not going to be New York University if it decides to move to Miami. And, and Columbia University, I think, the last thing that they would think of doing is leaving that, the campus in Upper Manhattan. Right. So these are organizations, and for hospitals, they are there to serve the community. Right. People aren't flying from all over the world to come to them. Well, sometimes they are here in New York, but but they're fundamentally serving the community. And so the concept of an anchor institution is because they are so part of the community and tethered to the community, that they can think more about how their enormous economic power can be used to the direct benefit of the community. They're hiring thousands of people. They're spending millions of dollars in contracts that can benefit small businesses that are in the community. They can hire from people in the community with more intentionality than they're doing now. And so what the paper discusses is the potential for the mayor, and here it's both acting as an employer and a purchaser, but also with that bully pulpit role of rallying the troops to join the city in acting in a very intentional way to use their economic power to benefit the communities where they exist. So there's just to maybe take a few minutes on some of the ways that this is being done. So first, in hiring, the strength of anchor organizations can be enhanced by being more attentive to the populations that they serve and having a workforce that reflects that population, that is more fully appreciative of the culture and the norms and the patterns of that population, and has a greater ability to connect with and improve its service offerings by adopting into their workforce a full array of representation from the community. So by creating goals of hiring from the community, you not only help to build wealth in the community through increased employment, but you're also strengthening your organization to be more responsive to community needs. And so the first strategy is really around how do you use your hiring power to recruit and place people from the community into available jobs. It's not just about putting, notices up on community job boards. It's really about a very active outreach and engagement. And many anchors are developing skills pipelines, working with young people in the community, working with people who are discovering new careers to help to support skills development so that people are equipped for the jobs of the future that those anchor institutions will be offering. The second is procurement. We're in New York, so it's billions of dollars is spent on buying food, buying supplies, doing repairs and landscaping and all kinds of physical plant work. And so the second area of effort has been around setting goals for the organization of how much of their buy will be local buy. And in the case, for instance, of the Metropolitan Police in London, we just went through their entire budget and looked at everything that they purchased. We found that about 40% of it would be easily obtainable from the local communities, and they have set a target for themselves around a percent of those purchases coming from the local communities. So it takes just a little roll up your sleeves and figure out what you're getting and what's available and how it can easily translate into that. The third area, and this is one that universities will know well, is around physical plant. Have you built a facility that has is a fortress with a wall around it that excludes community, or is your physical plant and layout and one that welcomes and integrates well into the community, that builds a sense of community life and advances kind of the social infrastructure of the community. And so lots of ideas there around active design guidelines and such that can help to be both be open to the community, but also create opportunities for the community to come into the campuses. And so a lot of physical plant opportunities as well. And so the basic bottom line here is that we don't have to necessarily spend new money to address equity issues. We spend a tremendous amount of money already. And if we are more intentional in the way that we spend our money and do it with a focus on how we can leverage that for community wealth building, we can address these equity issues by having that outreach and the inclusion to really focus on the highest need communities and be part of what's necessary to reverse this chronic disparity that continues to exist.
Awesome, Linda. Thank you. Really, really interesting. I did have just a really quick follow-up question for you, because I think in your paper you mentioned, I don't remember if it's London or elsewhere, maybe it was in Pennsylvania, utility companies. Are they anchor institutions?
Oh yeah. You think you can branch out, but you are hardwired into the homes. Utilities are, public utilities are they're a public service. They are by definition anchor institutions. And so I forget the exact name of the utility in California, but it created an anchor network. It was primarily focused on jobs and training, and developed an extraordinarily robust partnership with local universities around skills building and training the local workforce for jobs that were projecting, not just, on the board today, but they looked forward into the future and looked at the, future, all the transformations in the community, and trained for those future needs. And I see Andrew, have real hand up.
Are we allowed to ask questions of the other panelists?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was going to say, while I had questions for you all, you intimated earlier that you might have a question or two for Richard, and it seems you might have one for Linda. So I'm happy to have this be kind of an interactive conversation where we ask each other questions. So go ahead.
So Martha, you do control the mic. So if I prattle on, please feel free to cut me off. But just turning to Linda first, because we just heard your very interesting presentation. Two questions, and they're not meant to be provocative, but they're genuine, which is, one is, how do you define community in this context? I've struggled with this concept for many, many years, because lots of people assert that they're doing things in relation to the community. And not too many people, it seems to me, take pains to actually identify just what that means. And I think it means different things in different contexts. The second question, a little bit related, which is, as part of your work in London and beyond, have you identified best practices relating to metrics for measuring, the impact that you aspire for these anchor institutions to have?
Yeah. I think you answered the first question, which is community has to define community. Anchors have each, are all different. Sometimes, like with the National Health Service in London, which is part of our anchor network, they could say community is all of the UK, but the way they are leaders in this, and the way they're thinking about it is that each clinic, each hospital, each local service delivery network is working with partners in the service area that they are where they're delivering their services. And sometimes that's a couple of blocks, and sometimes that's there's 32 boroughs. It could be there. Sometimes it's a agglomeration of 5 boroughs. I think what's important about that is around the intentionality. Even London, like many cities, like most cities, is also a very segregated city, but you will find pockets of poverty and need and social isolation in almost every segment of the city. And it's the intentionality around overcoming those barriers, whatever they are, that are keeping those people isolated. That may be race, that may be religion, that may be immigration status, that may just be intergenerational poverty. But with intentionality, know your neighborhood, know those blocks and lots, and have a tailored strategy that is going, this concept of credible messengers. Make your connection through people that will be trusted and listened to in order to draw them out. So it's a really kind of tailored to meet the unique needs of the community. And then the metrics, oh my God, I think they're probably they want to kick us out of London. They want to take our visas away if we had one, because we are like relentless. It's like, we need numbers, we need your baseline, we need your targets, we need to measure. And they're like, oh no, we just want to think big, good thoughts. And we're like, no, that's not okay. This stuff is actually, in terms of measuring, this is easy. This is like plain vanilla. It's like, you just got to get people to do it. It's not complex to measure impact of these strategies. Like, what was the diversity of your workforce? What was your local hire before? What's your local hire after? What portion went to small minority women-owned businesses from your community before? What portion after? So it's work. Somebody's got to do it, but it's not complicated.
Richard, you unmuted yourself. Did you have something also you wanted to say?
I guess it was more, although I think Linda's comment about the utilities helped, which is how much of this is a so-called eds and meds strategy, or how much, or more generally about nonprofits and our large, for-profit corporations. Do they function as anchors too, or do their profit? Is this a way of, can you persuade them that this helps them, or is this something that would be I could see where this could fit into the primary mission of nonprofits like eds and meds. But I do wonder, how do you see this working with for-profit institutions?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
had a
it's
similar, I was going to say, I just had a similar sort of thing, like the motivation may be different depending on, which institution you're talking about. So it's, yeah, it'd be interesting to know what you think, Linda.
Yeah, and this is a topic of some debate. When we actually started this conversation, there was a point of view that for-profit organizations by definition are not anchors. And there are some who do this work internationally that very strongly make that case. I'm of the opinion that that's wrong, that excluding private sector organizations is missing a huge opportunity. And I think private sector organizations, like, the headlines are always about, some sports team pulling up and, taking their city logo elsewhere. And, but I think the companies exist in places, and are very, very committed to the locality and are there because of their commitment to the locality. And so, of course, it's not true in all cases. But in many cases it is, and so it's missing an opportunity, and it gets back to what I was kind of intimating to before. To the extent that your organization is representative of the community where you exist, it is going to improve the strength of your organization. It will be seen more relevant. It'll be seen as responsive. It'll be, the optics of that to the community where they are is tremendous. And so I think there is, both the reasons in both directions for private sector organizations to participate. I want to jump in here. I'm going to turn it away from me because I have to say, Richard, working in New York City government, had the 30 years of New York City government and the pleasure of serving as a deputy mayor for 8. If I knew how powerful we were when I was there, I would have been so much more badass than I was. It was like, what now, traveling around the world, working in places like Paris and London and Mexico City and Rio, but also Kansas City and Miami and Houston. There is nowhere else on the face of the earth where the mayor is as powerful as the mayor of New York City. And so if anything, I think it's maybe hard to believe, Richard, but you may have understated it. I mean, because you were kind of absolute there, but it's really, really, really remarkable. The power of the mayor in New York. And I think, when we grow up in our New York bubble, we don't know that. We're like, oh, this is a job and I have to do it. And this is what I do, right? And it's just, and I'm not saying I was a wimp. I was just saying, boy, or maybe I wouldn't have taken the job. Maybe it would have scared the bejesus out of me.
I mean, it is relative. I'm not saying that the mayor is omnipotent, but just as you look at, as you just said, as you compare this position, chief executive of the city of New York, with chief executive positions in many other places other than pure dictatorships, mayor's got a lot of power. Not to again, the state is out there. You can get foot-dragging resistance from below. There can be community opposition. I'm not saying mayor is omnipotent, but in terms of just formal authority, the mayor has a huge amount. And then when you add in the mayor's command of the media, as we've seen with this mayor, I was even thinking about your proposal, not a question, but just sort of, my mind is like, what laws need to be done to do this? And the short answer you're going to say is you don't need to do any laws, which is absolutely right. But you probably would be helped by a mayor who basically, talks to people or meets with the councils of this or that organizations and urges that people do it. And the mayor that flies the flag on this might actually have an impact. And you don't need laws at all for yours, but I do think this is one of those things where the mayor makes this an issue. I mean, Mayor Bloomberg made public health things an issue, and the smoking and other things, indoor smoking and sugary drinks didn't work out, but he put it on the table. And the bike lanes that are, you could just sort of see the mayor, not necessarily the biggest ticket items, but certainly certain items that were not on the agenda at all. The mayor can put it there, it's there, and some things can get done.
You know, that's connected really to one of the questions that I have for each of you, which is, you know, practically, right? So, you know, the students here at Wagner, they want to know how to make things happen. So I like that
Not
idea,
mayor,
Linda.
no.
I like that idea, Linda, of like, we would have been more badass than we tried to be if we, you know, kind of knew on some level. So I'm just wondering, you know, sort of Richard, so a mayor who actually cares about, and I know this one does, our NYC 2025 kind of dual goals, like who gets it done? Is it the mayor? Do you charge a deputy mayor like Mayor Bloomberg charged, you know, Linda, get technology happening in the, you know, health and human services area? And so she put together a task force of people who are looking at stuff. So like, so how do you actually take these great ideas that are contained in the paper, in your papers, and make it a reality? And is it all on the mayor, or who else should those of us who care about this be reaching out to make sure they know about these great ideas?
Well, I'm going to leave that to the people who've been deputy mayors and commissioners who know about it. So all I'll say is the thing that's probably most on the mayor is picking the right people for the next set of jobs. And then I would say choosing his issues, choosing the ones where he wants to make sure they have the resources and attention. But the people who actually have done it are the other people on the screen. So maybe they probably have more useful, and yourself.
I'm good.
They probably have you and they have the real answers to that.
So I won't pretend to have a real answer. So I'll be evasive by introducing an observation, which is that, you know, in addition to the ability to leverage the relative amount of media coverage in New York City versus, say, Albany, another source of soft power in the city that I think is actually underappreciated is the fact that the city, notwithstanding, you know, the financial crisis of the 70s and whatnot, has an incredible depth of talent within the government itself, right? There are internal resources with respect to you know, analysis, policy analysis, data collection, just that make. I mean, believe me, I've served in New Jersey state government, for instance, and I would say that one of the really striking differences, this isn't a knock on New Jersey, but the lack of internal analytics in New Jersey in particular, but also to some degree at the state level in New York versus the city was striking, really striking. And I think those of us who are sort of interested in government process need to appreciate that and also protect it to the extent we can, because, you know, that's the stuff that can be most vulnerable, you know, when the next fiscal crisis comes around. That's a real source of power, I think. The other thing that I just wanted to add into your discussion, Richard, was an observation that in my experience, the mayor's power to control revenue estimates is really, in many ways, the fulcrum of his overall institutional power, certainly vis-a-vis the budget, but even beyond. And interestingly enough, that is a power that the governor does not have in relation to the state legislature. But in New Jersey, the governor does have that power. And it was interesting for me to have, you know, working in the city, then going to the state of New York and then the state of New Jersey to see how that plays out. And I can tell you that stands out as a major, major factor in the power dynamic.
That's great. That's great. I got it. Can I pull my paper back and revise it slightly to put that in? A really important point. Absolutely.
No, it's and Andrew would know this from being at the city council, and you know, of the you know, and it's interesting because I think while New York City is a very strong mayor, and by definition that kind of diminishes the legislative power, I wouldn't say that New York City the council is a weak body. I think that you know, a lot of their powers and are statutorily strong, but I think they also have a culture of being a strong policy counterpoint, and they've used it strategically to advance ideas. I worked in the city council for a number of years, so I'm a big fan of like council as a place to kind of like where new ideas can get born and kicked around and advanced. And so it's you know, there's leadership that comes from the positions that, you know, and maybe this is a way also of looping back to your question, Richard, that which is, you know, who else? I mean, if people are standing by the mayor's side in calling for, you know, and bringing others to the table, I mean, the council leader is a good candidate to be one of those collaborating partners. You know, it's interesting in London, there's they have several university consortiums. And so leadership on the governing board of the recovery work includes those university consortiums, but it also includes the Church of England. You know, so there's, you know, there's the actual recovery board is co-chaired by something called the London Councils. They have 32 boroughs in the city of London, and there is a kind of a trade group of the boroughs. The boroughs collectively are more powerful than the mayor by far. They're real governmental service delivery entities, and so the mayor and the director of the borough lead, who is the elected head of the London Councils, co-lead the recovery board. But, you know, so there are a number of candidates, and it's really about, you know, sort of who has the legitimacy to bring others to the table, and, you know, who people respect and would, you know, gladly kind of, you know, serve behind and with. But you know, just back on, you know, so while the New York City Council is fairly, you know, I think is a pretty feisty, meaningful body, the fact that they can't control the revenue estimate, it's like just hugely curtails their budget.
But what they can do, Linda, I mean, I think you would appreciate that under the charter revisions of the late 80s, the city council has developed expertise and has a great deal of authority with respect to land use. And I raise that in this context because as I'm thinking through the implications of your analysis vis-a-vis anchor institutions, a lot of that touches on land use. So it may be that in terms of developing and building out your concept, it may be that the city council may be critical in addition to the mayor because of its role over land use, which is implicated in nearly everything or all the strategies that you mentioned.
And the kind of that local connection, right? That being that intermediary, that vehicle for really understanding the communities.
And they might be useful also in terms of the intra-city equity, in the sense that it may be that many of our anchor institutions are concentrated in certain areas more than others. And so that might be, the council might be a way of promoting, or I mean, checking again, what can government do, maybe whether it's funneling money or something, or incentives to, you're right, there are probably hospitals everywhere, and there may, but you have a sense that my guess is that there are certain areas that are high concentration of institutions and some that are low. And one way to think about it is how to strengthen the ability of the institutions, the anchor institutions in areas where they're kind of standing by themselves to promote the communities around them.
And my only point was them, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, and just letting them know that, you know, they matter and that they are seen, right? And that you think of them as a kind of vital player in, you know, sort of doing this work with you. And I think there's something huge about making sure that that happens. So Andrew, feel free to chime in here, but yeah, I was just gonna say for a second, you know, Richard, you said the right people and choosing issues. So I'm just curious from each of you, how's the city doing? I mean, it's 90 days, I think, well, soon to be 90 days, right? On the 30th of March, if I'm counting correctly. I actually have to do the 28 days from February, no matter. But we're getting, you know, close to kind of the 100-day mark. How do you think the mayor's doing, the city council, how are they doing right people choosing issues? And some, of course, issues have chosen the mayor. You know, he has had to respond to a number of things that certainly might not have been early on in his agenda. So just curious about that. But Andrew, feel free to chime in if you have another question.
Let me just, before addressing your question, just restate my earlier thought, which was that if you consider the touch points between anchor institutions in the city, for instance, take Columbia University, I'm going to guess that 90+% of those touch points are land use related, traditionally. So that's why I'm thinking the city council might be instrumental in building out this strategy. You know, because there are enforcement mechanisms, by the way, attendant to land use. The city has already done this on a semi-informal basis for years, right? You know, you have land use related deals where the institution will make certain commitments vis-a-vis the committee, the community, everything from security services to local job hiring and so forth. It's all about land use, and that's where the council excels. Anyway, let me turn to your question, Martha. You know, I took a minute or two to look at the mayor's preliminary budget, and you know, my summary reaction is, well, he hasn't done any harm yet, at least vis-a-vis tax competitiveness. In fact, I didn't really discern any significant change in tax policy, and that's good news at several levels. So it means that through a combination of you know, continuing federal resources, but also through increased economic activity, which is generating some additional revenue for the current fiscal year as well as for the out years. There is apparently at this point no overriding need to consider you know, additional revenue from taxes, and so it begs the question, however, if you do have some breathing space, should you perhaps begin to put together a strategy for leveraging that as an opportunity? And I don't know, given everything else on his plate, I'm not sure this is going to be the highest priority for this mayor at this time, and you know, but I'm hoping that he and his senior advisors will take a long-term view at some point, perhaps after this current, you know, this current budget process is concluded later on in the spring.
Great, thanks. Linda, how's he doing?
Well, you know, I just want to maybe bounce off of that a little bit. I think, you know, Andrew, I thought your paper was just terrific. I thought it's so thoughtful and such a great framework of thinking. And I think a little bit of the short-term, you know, windfall that cities have received across the country, shame on those who don't use it as an opportunity to think about adjusting their plans for the longer term, because it is exactly that opportunity. And I think that bringing some of the framework of your thinking into that longer term fiscal planning is what the mayor's office should be doing. Now, the first budget is like, you know this, Martha, it's just unfair to judge a mayor based on the first budget. They have 5 seconds to make adjustments. So it'll be the executive budget that we'll see a little bit more perhaps. But again, you know, we're protected by the fact that we have so much of recovery dollars that is, you know, some cities don't have government operations big enough to spend the money that quick. You know, New York City will not have that problem. But that also just kind of avoids or deflects or puts off the reckoning of how to come to terms with the longer term fiscal plan for the city. I think the mayor's doing great. I just think he's doing fantastic. I think he's the cheerleader for the city. He so clearly loves the city and loves the people in it and is looking out for the city's good. I get a kick of, you know, just listening and watching. I think he's put together a good team. He's got good leaders who are skilled and knowledgeable and, you know, are getting, you know, their feet on the ground to figure out, I'm going to call them up and tell them how powerful they are so that they jump into the job as fully as possible, as quickly as possible. But I think it's early, right? It's really early. There's no, you can't, or is his strong rhetoric, he's clearly willing to take actions to make his mark and to have his point of view be felt in terms of who he's picking and the issues and how he's addressing them. So I think it's, very high on promise, and it's just too soon to judge either way.
Great. Well, Lori sent us a note 6 minutes ago saying we only had 2 minutes. So I'm going to, this has been like the fastest hour ever, actually, certainly for my day to day. And so I want to, unless Richard, you have like one last thing you want to say about this. I mean, I think you've been pretty great already.
Echo Linda, and maybe put in one point give him credit for getting off on a good start with Albany. It seems to be getting off on a good footing with Albany, which is also very important. But that's otherwise, I agree with everything that's been said.
Great, fantastic. Well, let me stop us here and hope that we can continue to have conversations about this. But just really to thank you first and foremost for your contribution, but especially for your time today and your sort of thoughtful way in which you put this information forward. And I look forward to continuing to see you all over the next 30 years. So thank you so much. And NYC 2025 could not be better without you. So thank you so much for your work. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Martha.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.